At its peak, Spain controlled more silver than the rest of the world combined. They still went broke, not once, 4 times. And the force that made it happen is not buried in the past. It is operating inside your economy right now. And once you understand how it works, you will not be able to unsee it. In 1545, indigenous Andean herders in what is now Bolivia found silver ore glinting from the surface of a mountain. The Spanish crown arrived within a decade. What they found beneath that surface was Cerro Rico, the rich mountain. At its peak, this single mountain produced more than 60% of the entire world's silver supply. Between 1545 and 1800, Spain extracted 150,000 metric tons of silver from the New World. 80 to 90% of all silver produced anywhere on Earth during that entire period, more than the entire rest of the world combined. The treasure fleets sailed from Potosi to Seville every year, ton after ton, ship after ship. From Seville, the silver moved across Europe, paying soldiers in the Netherlands, paying bankers in Genoa, buying silk from Italy and wool from England. Spain did not keep the silver. It moved through Spain like water through a pipe. But before we follow that silver, you need to understand what it cost to pull it out of the ground. His name has not survived. That is part of the story. He was an Andean man, probably in his 20s, drafted under the mita, the forced labor quota the crown used to supply the mines. He did not volunteer. His village was assigned a number. His name came up. He walked for days to reach Potosi. Inside Cerro Rico, the tunnels were dark and narrow, saturated with mercury vapor. Mercury was used to process the silver ore. It poisoned everything it touched, the air, the water, the lungs of the men who breathed it for years. Workers hauled heavy loads up steep ladders in total darkness. Shifts stretched toward 24 hours. They chewed coca leaves to suppress hunger and exhaustion. The Andean people called it the mountain that eats men. He carried silver up those tunnels again and again, days without sunlight, air full of poison, until his body gave out. Modern estimates put the colonial-era death toll from Potosi at between 8 and 10 million people. 8 million lives consumed inside a mountain to produce silver that crossed the Atlantic and immediately flowed out again to pay Spain's debts to foreign bankers. He never saw a single coin of it. And here is what will stay with you. Neither did Spain, because here is what that silver was actually doing as it moved across the world. It was making everything more expensive. Before the New World silver arrived, Europe had a stable money supply. Prices moved slowly. A loaf of bread in 1490 cost roughly what it had in 1450. Life was hard, but it was predictable. Then the amount of silver in circulation began doubling, then doubling again. More coins chasing the same amount of goods. Prices started climbing. First in Spain, where the silver arrived first, then spreading east across the entire continent, city by city, market by market, like a slow fire nobody could find the source of. Historians call this the price revolution. Between 1500 and 1650, prices across Western Europe rose approximately 6 times over, 600%. In Spain, grain prices rose more than 5 times in the 16th century alone. In England, wheat tripled in price between 1510 and 1580. In France, bread riots broke out repeatedly as the cost of the most basic food outran what working families could earn. In Rome, rents doubled and then doubled again as Spanish silver flooded the Italian banking system. In city after city, ordinary people experienced this not as an economic phenomenon, but as a personal disaster. Families who had been stable for generations suddenly could not pay for what they had always paid for. The amounts had not changed, the money had. Wages lagged everywhere, they almost always do. But that is not the real problem. The visible inflation was painful, but what was happening underneath was far more destructive. Almost nobody in Spain understood it until decades after the damage was done. And this is where the damage becomes permanent. When more money flows through one country than its neighbors, prices inside that country rise faster than prices outside it. Spanish textiles became more expensive than Dutch textiles. Spanish manufactured goods could not compete with goods from England or northern France, so Spain did what any empire with unlimited cash flow does. They stopped building and started buying. Why develop a textile industry when you can buy cloth from Antwerp with silver? Why invest in agriculture when you can import grain? Why build manufacturing capacity when the mine is still running and the fleet is still sailing every year? The Dutch took Spanish silver payments and reinvested them into ships, factories, and global trade routes. England did the same. Spain used that same silver to buy what those ships and factories produced. The silver did not build Spain. It built everyone else. Modern economists call this Dutch disease. A massive single resource inflates your currency, prices out every other industry, and leaves you entirely dependent on the one thing you cannot control forever. Spain was not the last case. It was the first, and the most complete destruction the pattern has ever produced. A hidalgo is a Spanish lower noble, not wealthy enough to be a grandee, not poor enough to work with his hands, fixed rents, a government pension, a church stipend unchanged for 15 years. His grandfather had been comfortable on these same incomes, a respectable household, decent clothes, a servant. By the time the price revolution ran its full course, those same incomes bought less than a third of what they once had. He could not raise his rents fast enough. His pension was fixed by royal decree and did not move. Bread had tripled, cloth had doubled. Everything he needed cost more every single year without stopping. He was not foolish. He had not made bad decisions. He had simply held a fixed income in a world being flooded with silver. He sold the furniture, then the silver plate, then the house. Across Spain, thousands of men exactly like him disappeared the same way. Not from violence, not from famine, from an invisible force, an abundance of money destroying the value of everything denominated in that money. The workers had it worse. Wages lagged months behind prices. When wages finally caught up, prices had already moved again. They were always chasing something they could not reach. This is what the richest empire in history was doing to its own people, and it was doing the same thing to itself. Philip II declared bankruptcy in 1557, then again in 1560, then again in 1575, then again in 1596, 4 times, 39 years, the most powerful monarch in the world. He controlled Spain, Portugal, the Netherlands, large parts of Italy, and an empire spanning 2 continents. The mines were producing, the fleets were sailing, and he was still going broke. Because wars do not wait for treasure fleets. Soldiers in the Netherlands needed paying every month. When the payments stopped, as they regularly did, those soldiers did not wait. Between 1572 and 1607, Spanish troops in the Netherlands mutinied over 45 times. 45 separate occasions when Philip's own elite army turned against him, not from ideology, not from disloyalty, because the silver had not arrived and they had not eaten, so the crown borrowed against silver that had not yet arrived. They pledged future treasure as collateral. They issued bonds promising repayment from the next fleet. When the fleet arrived, it was already spent, twice over, sometimes 3 times. When Philip declared bankruptcy, he was not saying Spain had no money. He was saying the money Spain had was already promised to someone else. The system had consumed its own future before that future could arrive. Stop there, because that is not 1575 anymore. Venezuela sat on the largest proven oil reserves in the world. At the peak of the boom, the government spent as if the boom would never end. They borrowed against future oil revenues. They let domestic industries collapse because imported goods were cheaper and oil paid for everything. Then oil prices fell. Not to zero, they fell. They slowed. The infrastructure that had been neglected started failing. The factories that had been abandoned were gone. The debt came due. And Venezuela, sitting on more oil than Saudi Arabia, could not keep the electricity on or feed its own population. Nigeria, Angola, the Democratic Republic of Congo, different country, different resource, same sequence. The windfall consumed instead of invested. Domestic industries hollowed out. Debt built on the assumption that the flood would never slow. And when it slowed, there was nothing underneath. Because there never had been. Now stop, because this is not about Spain, or Venezuela, or any country from a history book. This is about you. Right now, your salary increases, but everything you buy rises faster. The savings account paying you 1% while inflation runs at 4%. The salary raise of 3% while everything you buy went up 8%. Your savings lose value even when the number goes up. That is not bad luck. That is not a coincidence. That is the gap between the paper and the real thing growing a little wider every single year. Spain believed the silver would flow forever and built its entire empire on that assumption. John Law believed Louisiana would eventually deliver the real wealth to back his paper money. Every central bank running quantitative easing today is making the exact same bet, that the money being created will buy enough time for the real economy to catch up. They are all waiting for Louisiana to deliver. They are all waiting for the fleet to arrive. John Law printed fake money and destroyed France in 18 months. Spain had the realest money in the world, 150,000 metric tons of it pulled from the ground by 8 million lives. Same result. Because the problem was never the type of money. The problem was what the money replaced. It replaced the need to build, the need to invest, the need to create something that would survive when the flood slowed. And once a system learns it does not need to build, it forgets how. Spain did not fall from lack. It fell from excess. That is how empires disappear. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but slowly, while everything still looks like it is working, until one day it is not. Every empire leaves a trail. That trail is always written in the currency. The next video in this series is different. Not a collapse from too much money or too little. A collapse built around a single flower. Tulip Mania. The moment an entire continent discovered you could build a financial market around something with no intrinsic value at all. And why the people who lost everything were not fools. They were following a logic that made perfect sense, right until the moment it did not. Subscribe to the History of Capital. because the people who understand this history are not the ones who lose everything when the pattern repeats. Most people just never bother to learn it.